there's some sort of like rabbinic cabal that gets together before the high holidays and just writes the rabbi's sermons so that way you all have the same things to talk about. I wish there was, especially this year. There is a lot to discuss, and I couldn't fit it in, obviously, to one Rosh Hashanah sermon. I've divided my remarks into four, all connected in particular ways. So if you feel that there's a cliffhanger today, come back tomorrow. And I mean that sincerely. There's 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, don't forget. Okay. Oh, and take the over. Sorry. All right. I want to take you back 8 years ago. Exactly 8 years ago right now. Rosh Hashanah 2016. I introduced you to a fictional character, taking her through factual events, and we're going to meet her again right now. Emma is thriving during her first week at Columbia. Like most Jewish freshmen, within hours of arriving on campus, she's marched by her parents to the Hillel building where they gladly write out a check covering the costs of all Hillel events for the next 4 years. And the first is an inaugural Shabbat dinner that Friday, but Emma, she's also raised to understand that the greatest expression of Judaism is social justice, the practice of tikkun olam, repairing the world, and anxious to put that to practice, she immediately seeks involvement in several social action groups on campus, including one called No Red Tape. Their mission statement: we work to end sexual and domestic violence on our campus community because we envision a world free of violence and oppression. And she and a few new Jewish friends, they head to the Red Tape's first meeting of the year, which was only hours before her scheduled first Shabbat dinner. And she's surprised. She's surprised to find it strangely populated, not solely by students committed to combating sexual violence, but also by students proudly handing out anti-Israel literature and BDS boycott, divestment, and sanction flyers. There's a guest speaker. She sits and she listens unexpectedly to an eviscerating speech by the president of Students for Justice in Palestine. She's not yet sure what the connection between No Red Tape and SJP is, but she's stuck in her chair. After all, she's new to Columbia, and to be involved in the fight against sexual violence, she's got to endure this tirade a little longer. And when the speech finally ends, Emma exhales with relief, anxious for the meeting to proceed with a more fitting agenda. But the rest in attendance, they leap from their chairs in an ovation. From the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, they chant. Pins picturing the state of Israel wrapped in barbed wire with the words boycott, divest, sanction. They're passed out, and the attendees, they race to fasten them to clothing and backpacks. And Emma's handed one. And she inquisitively turns to her neighbor, and she notices a backpack, a smorgasbord of anti-Israel pins and patches. And seeing Emma's discomfort, the neighbor, she places her hand on Emma's shoulder, and she says, we believe that all struggles for freedom and equality are interconnected. We must embody the principles and ideals we envision for a just society. Don't you agree, Emma? Of course, she says. Well, I just quoted you the mission statement for Students for Justice in Palestine. Sexual violence is a form of oppression. It can't be divorced or separated from other oppressed identities, including the Palestinians. And Emma listens to the neighbor, listens to the rest of the meeting, which is peppered with buzzwords like genocide, apartheid, occupation, human rights. She doesn't fasten the BDS pin to her backpack, but she doesn't throw it away either. She also skips the inaugural Shabbat dinner at Hillel that night. Welcome to the college campus in 2016, I said to you 8 years ago. 8 years ago. And I continued. Before you think this is a sermon about college students, those of you who happen to have found yourselves on campuses in the 60s, you can verify that what happens on college campuses in America never stays on college campuses. And our greatest threat is something we are not paying much attention to, I said. They're starting to use a term you need to know. That term is intersectionality, and it holds that various forms of oppression, racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, they constitute an intersecting system of oppression, and it's why the president for Students for Justice in Palestine gets an audience with red tape. Why Black Lives Matter chapters pass out posters that read, "From Ferguson to Palestine." Why the National LGBTQ Task Force chose to ally itself with Palestinians championing Hamas, a government that executes LGBTQ communities. That was in 2016. What is poor Emma to do, I asked. There's a price. To be on the front lines of social justice initiatives that almost all of us agree with: civil rights, gender equality, sexual violence, awareness, religious tolerance. By senior year, which was 2020, by senior year, the Emmas of America are at risk of digging up those BDS pins and fastening them proudly to their backpacks. In 2016, I introduced you to intersectionality, to BDS, to SJP, to the growing threat on the American college campus, and that it would swallow up our kids or victimize them. 8 years later, here we are. It's 2024. This story is not about a fictional character. This story is the outcome of what I warned you about in 2016. It's the first day of school. Little girl springs out of bed. She'd already laid out her outfit of choice the night before, so within minutes, she's already posing outside with her handmade poster. First day of 3rd grade. An ear-to-ear smile radiating excitement and enthusiasm, and off she goes. But she's not the same little girl when she returns home in the afternoon. Smile's gone. The excitement deflated and replaced by an uncharacteristic melancholy. The change is instantly noticeable to her parents, who appropriately ask, "What's wrong? What happened in school today?" And after some coaxing, the little girl reluctantly explains. It started out great. New classmates, a new teacher, a new room. We started with some morning games, then an activity so we could learn about each other, and I offered to go first. And so I stood at my desk, and the teacher, she asked me to say my name, and I did. She asked me what I liked to do, and I told her. Then she asked me if I traveled anywhere during the summer, and I responded. And then she asked me my favorite holidays. And the little girl's upper lip begins to quiver, and her eyes well with tears, and her parents are confused. So the girl continues. I told the teacher I didn't want to say my favorite holidays, and now the parents are really confused. Why not? Because I didn't know if it was okay. If the kids find out I'm Jewish, they might not like me. That little girl, right now, is in junior congregation. Her father told me that story. And that little girl is every little Jewish girl and boy that started school this year. She is every one of our kids tiptoeing on college campuses that have been ravaged by over 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents since October 7th. And we know that incident in 2024 is not the same as it was in 1994. Today's incidents are isolated. They're not isolated. They don't merely target an individual. Scores of Jewish students, your kids, on on every college campus are terrorized. That's the word that you use. They are terrorized. And there's no accountability, and there's no punishment, there's no condemnation, there's no safeguard. The builders of our houses of education have removed the guardrails, leaving Jewish students, our kids, vulnerable, unprotected, and at the mercy of the anti-Semitic, wait a minute, sorry, anti-Zionist mob, which is usually comprised of their own professors. How did we get here? In 2016, I was called excessive, and I was called an alarmist. But my friends, my role is to be honest, even when you don't want to hear it. So here's the truth. Today's Rosh Hashanah. We're here for Teshuvah. That word does not mean repentance. It means return. Chet does not mean sin. It means miss the mark. Off in the distance, there is an ideal version of every one of us as individuals and as a collective, attainable by simply traveling upon a direct path towards an aspirational bullseye of perfection that's off in the distance, but we stumble, all of us. We lose our way. We miss the mark. Teshuvah is a return to the right path. And the process begins by redirecting that finger of blame from others to ourselves. We have to ask, where did we stray? In other words, the task of today and the next 10 days is to be honest and admit, it's not you, it's me. And guess what? It's not them, it's us. And to be honest, we have to go back to the beginning. Travel with me to the past. Our first collective calamity, Tisha B'Av, 586 BCE. The prophet Jeremiah, he bears witness as a seething enemy slowly emboldens Nebuchadnezzar. The Tanakh calls him Mashchit Goyim, the destroyer of nations, tornadoing across the ancient Middle East until he and his savages reached the kingdom of Judah and the gates of Jerusalem. The prophet Jeremiah bears witness to the rising tides of hate and eventually the onslaught. At the time, it was unraveled in its totality and its brutality. And his testimony is preserved for us in the Tanakh. Graphic accounting of the collapse of the first sovereign Jewish nation. Here it is. Our enemies looked on and laughed over our downfall. All our enemies jeer at us. They hiss, they gnash their teeth, and they cry, we've ruined them. Nar v'zaken betulotai ubachurai naflu becherev. The young, the old, women, children, infants, all fallen by the sword. My eyes are spent with tears. My heart is in tumult. My being melts away over the ruin of my poor people. Babies, infants, languish. Those are not ancient words trapped within the dusty pages of the past. They're alive. They're with us in the present. They are words that were uttered by all of Am Yisrael this year. And to whom does Jeremiah point the finger of blame and accountability? Panic and pitfall are our lot. Death and destruction. My eyes shed streams of water over the ruin of my poor people. My eyes shall flow without cease, without respite. The kings of the earth, they didn't believe. The inhabitants of the world, they didn't believe that a foe or an adversary could enter the gates of Jerusalem. Nobody saw it coming, he said. No one thought it could happen. And then, it was for the sins of our prophets, the iniquities of our own priests. At whom does Jeremiah point the finger of accountability? At the Babylonians? No. His ancient cry, preserved for us all these centuries later, and what was it? It's not you. It's me. It's not them. It's us. It's our false prophets and misguided priests. That's what he said. Those assuming positions of authority adorned with prestigious titles, clinging to, pilfering, flawed and discredited ideas, ideas validated and emboldened by individuals from within our own ranks. Jews of intellectual, political, social, even religious prestige, and as a result then, and now, countless Jews, Jewish minds, kidnapped and held hostage by these distorted ideologies. And this pattern, my friends, false priests, misguided prophets, marching the masses in the wrong direction, that's been the precursor to nearly every calamity that's befallen the Jewish people. The destruction of the first and second temples, the stories of Purim and Hanukkah, the Inquisition, and yes, the Shoah, all preempted by the kidnapping of Jewish minds. And let me be clear, we are not the cause. We're not the cause of calamity. But our false prophets and misguided priests marching the masses in the wrong direction, that's a precondition. It's a precondition, paving an open roadway for our actual enemies to strike. Now, Teshuvah means return, a return to our covenantal path. And now, think of this. Now, today, what is the justification for the most virulent rise of anti-Semitism in American history? What's the justification? Tearing down posters of hostages is not anti-Semitic. It's anti-Zionist. October 10th, when 144 faculty member signatures at Columbia validate the pogrom by referencing October 7th as a military action, justified as an occupied people's right to exist, it's not anti-Semitic, it's anti-Zionist. Barricading Jewish students in classrooms and libraries, taunting them with threats like go back to Poland or from the river to the sea or resistance by all means necessary is not anti-Semitic because it's anti-Zionist. Setting up encampments, forcing the cancellation of classes, graduations, parading with Israeli flags that replaced the Star of David with a swastika and chanting, "We are Hamas." October 7th, 10,000 times. It's not anti-Semitic because it's anti-Zionist. When the presidents of our most elite institutions, Harvard, MIT, Penn, they're asked before Congress whether terrorizing Jewish students in such ways is protected speech or harassment, and they say it's context dependent. They greenlight the current climate and they affirm it's not anti-Semitic, it's anti-Zionist. And I don't have to belabor this point. Jonathan Sachs, a decade ago, he warned the world, anti-Semitism is a virus that survives by mutating. Middle Ages were hated for religion. 19th and 20th centuries were hated for race. And today we're hated because of a nation-state Israel. Anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. And hear this. Criticizing, denouncing an Israeli policy is neither anti-Semitic nor anti-Zionist. No country is beyond reproach. But calling for the dismantling of a country and its citizens by any means necessary, whether that's a music festival or a college campus, on Israel's soil or right here in America, that's anti-Semitic, full stop. But here's the rub. It's not you, it's me. It's not them, it's us. The origins of anti-Zionism are peculiar, and they are sadly ironic. The effort to disassociate the national aspirations of the Jewish people from Judaism was not an ideology forced on us, not some mutation of an age-old virus. We created it ourselves. 100 years ago, the rejection of the Jewish peoplehood, the rejection of peoplehood and national sovereignty was rooted in the conviction and the delusion that Judaism could only survive if it shed all claims of Jewish particularism, that humanity had progressed. Humanity had progressed so much by the 19th and early 20th century that the Enlightenment, the invitation. It was the best guarantee to the redemption of humanity and the Jewish people. Melt. This was the new categorical imperative. Melt. This was the way to assimilate properly. There was a light at the end of the long tunnel of exile and the directions to nirvana, and it read, melt. For the Jew to keep his Jewishness, the Jew must revise, redact, and even erase those rituals. You know those rituals. The ones deemed old-fashioned. They must be muted or discarded entirely. Melt away the idiosyncrasies. Abridge, revise, redact, erase, even the Torah itself. Melt. Because inconspicuous is the gateway to acceptance. That was the ideology of the time. And in any event, the primary thing about being a Jew is to have a good heart. Love thy neighbor. Jewish peoplehood was an embarrassment. Judaism had outgrown that idea. The world had evolved. Tolerance had been birthed from intellectual open-mindedness. That was the call of action, but there was a glitch. It was called the Holocaust. But the idea held fast. Listen to this. Penned by Rabbi Elmer Berger, 1943. The idea of a Jewish people is a fallacy. I cannot write about it because there is none. To designate the Jews as a national group is a vestige of the past. Enlightened states always refer to Jews as citizens of Jewish faith, inviting us to get out from under this concept of a restrictive national group. The Jews are no longer a separate nation. We are emancipated, integrated religious community among other religious communities of fellow citizens. In other words, for Berger, the Jew must be reduced to an ism. Melt away the principle that Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. Exchange meets vote, ritual, peoplehood for the religion of a good heart, a religion of social justice. Exchange the slogan, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives, for the slogan, Tikkun Olam, let's go fix the world. After all, listen to this, only the unenlightened failed to understand that it was poverty and disadvantage that created the demons that brought forth the terror of Jew hatred. Surely, if one backed the cause of the oppressed, they would in turn embrace us in their gratitude. My, that has not aged well. There is no such thing as the Jewish people-only Judaism. 1943. That idea should have burned in the ashes of Auschwitz. But it gained traction. As outlying Jewish leaders, they clung to it, they expanded upon it. Berger was appointed head of the American Council for Judaism. He took this idea, and with others, he built it, and he expanded, and then he joined it with a fledgling, like-minded political group in the 1960s. You've heard of this political group. It's called the PLO. In 1970, the PLO Research Center published a 271-page book, and it claimed, one of the oft-repeated claims amongst Arabs is that every Jew is a Zionist, and that Judaism and Zionism are two names for the same thing. Drawing a distinction between Jew and Zionist is essential for the Palestinian national effort. Conflating Jew and Zionist is a mistake, and here's the big hammer. The more the separation is perceived as part of the internal American Jewish discourse, motivated by authentically American Jewish values and interests, the more it will serve our cause. And here we are. Jews separated the Jewish state from the Jewish people. Jews reduced Jewish identity to merely a practiced religion, making Jewish peoplehood expendable. Jews advertised that championing social justice for all oppressed groups, people of color, women, LGBTQ, the poor, the imprisoned, it stood in stark contrast to the particularism of Zionism. Jews said that the idea of a special, exclusive state was incompatible with the universalist values of tikkun olam. Jews were the first to shout, "A state for some cannot coexist with just and equality for all." And I'll prove it again. But we'll pause. We'll bring in some Adam Sandler. Sing with me. When you think you're the only kid in town without a Christmas tree, here's a list of just like you and me. Noam Chomsky, educated at Penn, professorships, honorary doctorates at, here they are, Harvard, MIT, Columbia, and Stanford. It's misleading in the extreme to speak of Israel as a Jewish state. It's a Zionist state. Tony Jude, director of NYU's Remark Institute of European Studies. The very idea of a Jewish state is an anachronism. Peter Beinart, his father graduated Harvard. His mother graduated MIT. He graduated from Yale. I hope you're seeing repetition here. Former editor of the New Republic, prolific journalist. 2012, he was included in Foreign Policy's magazine list of top 100 global thinkers. What does he say? The very essence of Zionism, if the very essence of Zionism is Jewish statehood, I am no longer a Zionist. Judith Butler, PhD, Yale. Professor, Wesleyan, GW, Johns Hopkins. She's now at Berkeley. She's been there since 1993. I do not think that one has to be a Zionist in order to be a Jew. I affirm a Judaism that's not associated with state violence, that's not associated with colonial subjugation, that stands in solidarity with all oppressed peoples. I don't have to list them all. There's hundreds, there's thousands. And they're responsible for our kids' higher education. That's just the professors. How about the Jewish entertainers, the influencers, the politicians? You think nobody listens to Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein? They do. Jews masking as social justice warriors, propping up efforts to deny Jewish sovereignty, to dismantle the Jewish state by shouting, "A state for some cannot coexist with justice and equality for all." And that can't be anti-Semitic because I'm Jewish. Our false prophets, our misguided priests, they have spawned national organizations that token their Jewishness to validate hatred of a Jewish state, to validate hatred of the idea of a Jewish people. Jewish Voices for Peace, J Street, If Not Now, Teshuvah, which, by the way, Teshuvah claims on its board of directors the dean of the JTS Rabbinical School. That's where I went. Jews of intellectual, political, social, even religious prestige. Jeremiah's false prophets, they give comfort, credibility, and power to the notion that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And the PLO knew it all along. And they got it from Rabbi Berger. The more this idea was perceived part of the internal American discourse, motivated by authentically American Jewish values, the better it served those seeking Israel's destruction. And here we are, countless Jewish minds kidnapped and held hostage. So what do? First step of Teshuvah is to confess. We just did that. Second step is to ask forgiveness. We're doing it every day. The third step, pledge it will never happen again. It's time to hit the reset button. For the sake of that little girl down the hall that's afraid to say her favorite holidays out loud, and for every Jewish iteration of her, we have to hit the reset button. We owe her. We owe her entire generation. And her father wonders, where's the Jewish positivity curriculum? We've got positivity, body positivity, in health curriculums nationally. Where's Jewish positivity? And you'll hear more about this tomorrow. But that behind me, that alone, That's Jewish positivity. Uncensored, unredacted, undiluted, unabridged version, and you can call me excessive. You can call me an alarmist. But don't make me stand here in 8 years and say I told you so. Amiel Hirsch is one of the most prominent Reform rabbis in the country. He's an outlier amongst his colleagues because of Israel advocacy, because of his honest, introspective critique of his own movement, his own people. His advice transcends denominations. To paraphrase and listen, even if peace were to break out tomorrow, American Jews would still be increasingly alienated from Israel and Jewish peoplehood. And the reason is that a strong and positive relationship with Israel does not rest on politics or policies. It doesn't rest on Bibi, and it doesn't rest on the West Bank. It rests on Jewish commitment. The reason that American Jews are less attached to Israel and Jewish peoplehood is that they are less attached to Judaism, and not the Judaism of the last 100 years that we created on the shores of this country in order to melt. Not that Judaism. And we come full circle. The ideas of our predecessors have been decisively shown to be both false and unsustainable. Judaism and Jewish peoplehood are irrevocably intertwined. They are bound together. You can't separate them. And the rabbi writes, what did we think was going to happen? Year after year, decade after decade of assimilation, Jewish illiteracy, ignorance. Did we think it wouldn't eventually take its toll and finally express itself in multiple ways, including alienation from Israel, alienation from the Jewish people? We have to reverse the mass dilution of Jewish identity. And we have to do the hard, tedious, time-consuming, and expensive work of Jewish identity formation. We need more Judaism. We need more investments in Jewish schools, Jewish summer camps, and above all, we need more investments in synagogues like this one that promote unambiguous and unabashed Judaism. The real thing. We need more Jewish literacy. We had a young girl who had a bat mitzvah here this last Saturday, this last Shabbat. She davened every single word. Thursday morning, Saturday morning, Musaf, she gave a brilliant Devar Torah. And her father's not a rabbi, and she doesn't go to day school. And she plays soccer every afternoon. And she proved to all of us that it's possible. Leah Gamberg, she's here somewhere. You should give her a high five if you see her. We need more Jewish literacy, and the onus is on us, the American Jewish community. It's not on Israel. Our identification with the Jewish state and the Jewish people, it will transcend politics and policies because it will not emanate from there. Its source will lie in the much deeper, life-affirming, eternal wellsprings of Judaism itself, which is what's right behind me. It's the Torah. Now, where do we find the curriculum for Jewish positivity? I don't have to write it. And it's hard, and it's tedious, and it could be time-consuming and expensive work, but we can do it. And how do I know we can do it? Because since October 7th, we've mobilized in unprecedented ways. Hard, tedious, time-consuming, expensive work to support Israel. Last year was the largest campaign in Broward's Federation history. Right here, we raised nearly $200,000 in 10 days before my trip to Israel in November. And we must ensure Israel's existence. It is, as I said last Kol Nidre, it's the seatbelt of world Jewry. We have to ensure that it's there. But perhaps more important is to consider the long game. The long game. We need to create Jews who in a generation will do the same thing we are doing now, and that means the strongest expression of Zionism in 5785 is to invest right here. Synagogues, Jewish schools, Jewish camps, authentic, unambiguous, serious Judaism. surviving and defeated Jews are dragged like dogs out of Israel in 586 BCE. And they crossed into foreign lands, and they passed the tomb of our matriarch, Rachel. And the same Jeremiah is inconsolable, and he writes, "A cry is heard, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She can't be comforted. Her children are gone." And then God declares, "Yesh tikva la'achratech," but there's hope for your future. "V'shavuvanim ligvulam," your children shall return to your borders. 2,500 years later, we heard again the wailing and bitter weeping of Mother Rachel, live and in real time. Hirsch, stay strong, survive. Our Mother Rachel Goldberg, Poland, and her shrieks into Gaza are now seared into our memories and into the canon of Jewish history. It was not a plea to her son alone. It was to all of Israel's sons and daughters kidnapped and held hostage from Am Yisrael. And we must hear it not only as a plea to those physically held captive, but to the tens of thousands spiritually and psychologically held captive. Our ancestors crossed into exile. Rachel's cry echoed, mourning for her children lost. And today, that cry reverberates once more. It's heard in real time from a real mother, reminding us the story of our people is not just one of survival. It's of return. It's of renewal. The same promise given by God thousands of years ago remains. Yesh tikva la'achratech. There's hope for your future. And it's a hope that challenges us to reclaim our borders. Not just of land, of identity, of faith, of purpose. We are entering 5785, and we need to commit to a teshuvah that strengthens us as a people, that binds us to one another, that brings our kids back to the heart of Judaism. And that's it, right behind me. If we answer Rachel's cry with action, we can ensure that no Jew, physically or spiritually, will remain captive. We can create a future where our people will stand together proud of who they are, connected to our heritage, anchored in our shared destiny. May this year, the most important year for any of us as a people, be one of return, renewal, and hope fulfilled for all Am Yisrael. I wish you a Shana Tova.